Welcome to the deep dive. We have a heavy but incredibly illuminating stack of sources today.
We really do.
We're looking at the timeline of a notorious investigation, journalistic accounts of a highly controversial police undercover operation, and this is where it gets truly fascinating, a modern academic syllabus for a master's degree in homicide investigation.
Which is such a unique angle to look at this from.
Right. Our mission today is to deconstruct a monumental miscarriage of justice, specifically the Rachel Nickell case. And we want to figure out how the catastrophic mistakes made there literally rewrote the textbook on how detectives are trained today. Okay, let's unpack this from the very beginning.
So, to comprehend the psychological trap that the investigators fell into, you really have to understand the sheer horror of the triggering event.
Yeah, it was awful.
It really was. July 15, 1992, Wimbledon Common in London. A 23-year-old woman named Rachel Nickell is just walking her dog. She is suddenly and savagely attacked. Stabbed 49 times.
God, it's unthinkable.
It is. And making this even more nightmarish, the attack is actually witnessed by her 2-year-old son, Alex. He is later found just clinging to her body, pleading with her to wake up.
It's the exact kind of tragedy that just stops a nation in its tracks. Rachel was a young mother. The crime happened in broad daylight in a public park, and the resulting media coverage was absolute hysteria.
Understandably so.
Yeah, you had a terrified public demanding that this monster be taken off the streets immediately. I always think of this kind of police investigation like a pressure cooker. Like when the heat is turned up way too high, people start taking dangerous shortcuts.
That's a great way to put it. The police were operating under the suffocating level of scrutiny. They questioned 32 men in the initial sweep alone.
Wow, 32.
Yeah. But the crime scene was a forensic black hole. You have to remember, in 1992, DNA technology was still in its relative infancy. But even so, the killer had left no usable physical clues at all. No weapon, no fingerprints, no fluid samples that could break the case.
Nothing to go on. So, with no physical evidence to point away, the police take a different route. They decide to bring in a forensic profiler. Now, the profiler looks at the ferocity of the attack and builds this theoretical model of the killer's mind. And based almost entirely on that psychological profile, the police lock their sights on a local man named Colin Stagg.
So Stagg lived in the area and regularly walked his dog on the common, but more importantly to the police, he fit the profile's description of a socially isolated loner. He had these unconventional interests, specifically a devotion to Wicca, and he displayed what officers categorize as generally odd or awkward behavior during his interviews.
Okay, I have to push back here, because anyone listening is probably thinking the exact same thing. Being socially awkward and practicing a pagan religion is not a crime.
No.
You cannot just throw someone in pretrial detention because their vibe's a little weird.
Yeah.
If there is no DNA, no weapon, and no witness pointing him out, how does this investigation even move forward?
Well, that question right there is the crux of the entire disaster. This is where we see a masterclass in confirmation bias. The investigators had a theory, and instead of letting the evidence lead them to a suspect, they basically let the suspect lead them to manufacture the evidence.
It makes me think of confirmation bias, like wearing a pair of noise-canceling headphones.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like the police tune their frequency perfectly to Colin Stagg, and because they were so locked in on him, the blaring alarms of all other contradictory evidence, or, the lack thereof, were completely electronically filtered out. They couldn't hear anything but their own theory.
That is a perfect analogy, and because they were wearing those headphones, they realized they couldn't just arrest him for being eccentric.
Right.
They needed a confession, so they decided to set a trap to force one out of him.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The police launched this massively expensive, deeply bizarre undercover operation.
It's why.
They create a completely fake persona named Lizzie James. She is presented as this attractive, blonde woman who reaches out to Stagg through Lonely Hearts columns. Her sole objective is to elicit a confession by playing into his psychological vulnerabilities.
The defense attorney, who later represented Stagg in court, laid out the mechanics of this operation brilliantly. Over a grueling 5-month period, Lizzie James engaged in this deliberate process of psychological manipulation.
5 months.
5 whole months. She was essentially trying to groom him into becoming the killer the profile said he was.
Right, and it wasn't just, hey, did you kill that woman? She escalated the manipulation step by step. She started by offering romance and companionship. And for Colin Stagg, a man who had experienced profound social isolation and had basically never had a serious romantic relationship, this was intoxicating. He was desperate for connection.
Which brings us to a really crucial psychological concept, which is mirroring. When someone who is deeply isolated suddenly receives attention, especially romantic attention, they often don't have a baseline for normal relationship dynamics.
So they just copy the other person.
Exactly. They just mirror whatever the other person's doing to keep the connection alive. If she seemed interested in something, he suddenly pretended to be interested in it too.
The transcripts of their letters really show this. The police profile suggested the killer would have highly deviant sexual interests, including extreme violence and Satanism. But Stagg's initial letters to Lizzie were remarkably tame and conventional.
Very normal stuff.
Yeah, he wrote about wanting her to come over, cooking her dinner, having a glass of wine, maybe cuddling on the couch. There was zero violence.
Because that just wasn't who he was. So Lizzie's handlers told her to push harder. At one point, she sends him an occult pendant, heavily hinting that she's involved in dark, dangerous ritual.
Trying to bait him.
Precisely. She is fishing for the satanic killer the profile promised.
And how does Stagg respond? He immediately goes out and buys her a ring in return. He doesn't respond with a dark ritual. He responds with a desperate bid for traditional affection. He is so terrified of losing her attention that he just keeps trying to guess what she wants to hear.
Right, and when she says she wants him to be dominant, he awkwardly tries to write these fantasy stories where he's dominant, but he constantly fails to give her the violent, murderous confession the police need.
He just can't do it.
No. So Lizzie takes it to the extreme. She explicitly tells him that she can only truly love a man who has done terrible, violent things. She claims that she herself used to be with a man who hurt people, and watching it made her feel exhilarated.
That is, she is literally dangling love, physical intimacy, and a shared life in front of a deeply lonely man and telling him the only way to unlock it is to admit to murder.
It's entrapment.
And Stagg is completely lost. He writes to her, practically begging, please tell me what it is you want in every detail. He's not confessing. He is literally asking her for a script so he can play the character she wants to date.
What's fascinating here is the sheer blindness of the investigative team. They read these letters and thought they were cleverly coaxing a cunning killer out of the shadows.
While missing the obvious reality.
Exactly. From a psychological standpoint, anyone looking at this objectively sees a sad, isolated man frantically trying to write fantasy fiction so this beautiful woman won't abandon him.
Finally, Lizzie pushes him to the absolute brink. She demands to know his darkest secret. And Stagg realizes he has to give her something or she'll leave. So he confesses.
But not to murder.
No. He tells her that when he was 17, he had a brief homosexual encounter involving mutual masturbation on a park bench.
That was it. That was his darkest, most closely guarded secret.
And when she tries to force the issue, explicitly trying to link him to the Nickell murder on Wimbledon Common, he finally puts his foot down. He writes to her, I'm not a murderer, as my belief is that all life from the smallest insect, plant, animal, and man is sacred and unique.
That was the reality of Colin Stagg. The entire house of cards eventually collapsed in court in 1994.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. The presiding judge looked at the letters, the deliberate psychological manipulation, and the sheer desperation of the police tactics, and he threw the case out entirely. He ruled the evidence inadmissible because it was a textbook case of illegal entrapment. The police hadn't investigated a crime. They had tried to construct one.
But the collapse of the case against Colin Stagg is really only half the tragedy here. Because the noise-canceling headphones the police were wearing didn't just ruin Stagg's life. They allowed a genuine monster to operate with impunity.
That's the darkest part of this whole story.
While they spent 5 months and incredible resources trying to shove Colin Stagg into a box he didn't fit into, the real killer was out there.
Yes. His name was Robert Napper. And his timeline is frankly terrifying. He had been an active, highly dangerous predator since at least 1989.
The missed clues here are staggering. I mean, listen to this sequence of events. In November 1989, Napper's own mother called the police to report that her son had confessed to her about raping a woman,
His own mother.
and the police never seriously questioned him.
It's unbelievable. Fast forward to 1992, the exact same year Rachel Nickell is killed. There's a series of brutal assaults and a rape on the Green Chain Walk, which is a network of footpaths in London.
Right, and neighbors actually called the police twice, in August and September of 1992, to report that Robert Napper looked absolutely identical to the police sketches of the Green Chain rapist.
They literally handed him to the police.
The police actually visited him, but he just, conveniently failed to show up for the required blood tests, and the police let it slide.
The tunnel vision was just absolute. At one point in late 1992, Napper was officially eliminated as a suspect from that rape inquiry for a truly baffling reason. Investigators deemed him too tall.
Too tall! I mean, are you kidding me? Meanwhile, they are running a multi-layered espionage operation on a guy whose biggest crime is being socially awkward. And the consequences of this blindness were fatal.
Utterly fatal.
In November 1993, while Colin Stagg is sitting in pretrial detention, facing life in prison for a murder he had nothing to do with, Robert Napper strikes again. He breaks into a home and murders a woman named Samantha Bissett and her 4-year-old daughter, Jasmine.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the profound tragedy is that Napper's actual pathology was a universe away from the profile the police were trying to force onto Stagg.
Night and day.
Exactly. Post-conviction studies of Napper, who was later diagnosed with severe paranoid schizophrenia, revealed an opportunistic killer driven by extreme sadism. He had a documented rage for women, mixing intense anger with sexual violence.
And a loathing for young mothers, specifically.
Yes, he didn't fit the neat, tidy profile of the quiet Wiccan loner. He was a chaotic, escalating threat.
Yeah, because he didn't fit the profile, he was invisible to them. They didn't definitively connect Robert Napper to Rachel Nickell's murder with DNA evidence until 2004.
12 years later.
12 years of a ruined life for Stagg, and multiple lives lost because investigators fell in love with their own theory.
So how does an institution process a systemic failure of this magnitude? They do the only thing that can salvage any value from the wreckage. They reverse engineer the disaster and turn it into the curriculum for the next generation.
Which brings us to our final source, and honestly the most hopeful part of this deep dive. We have the actual syllabus for a Master of Science degree in homicide investigation delivered by the Liverpool Center for Advanced Policing Studies. This is the training ground for modern detectives.
And the Rachel Nickell case is literally hardwired into the DNA of this program. Module 2 of their syllabus is titled Case Studies of Success and Failure in Historic and Contemporary Homicide Investigations.
So they don't hide from it.
Not at all. The reading list explicitly features Colin Stagg, Robert Napper, and the Rachel Nickell investigation alongside other famous cases like the Yorkshire Ripper.
But they aren't just reading the history, right? They are studying the mechanics of the failure. Like, look at Module 8, Investigative Interviewing. This is where the ghost of the Lizzie James operation really lingers. This module goes deep into interview suggestibility and the psychology of false confessions.
This is a vital evolution in investigative science. In the past, police often thought a confession was the ultimate, infallible proof of guilt. But Module 8 teaches that human memory and behavior are highly suggestible under pressure.
Just like Stagg was.
Exactly. They teach the difference between an internalized false confession, where a suspect is so confused they actually start believing they did it, and a compliant false confession.
A compliant false confession is exactly what Lizzie James was trying to extract. That's when a suspect knows they are innocent. But the pressure, the threats, or the promise of a massive reward, like the love and intimacy Lizzie was offering, becomes so overwhelming that they confess just to escape the pressure or get the reward.
Today, detectives are rigorously trained in cognitive interviewing techniques. Instead of feeding a suspect a narrative and asking them to agree with it, they're taught to ask open-ended questions.
Right, they have to hold back key details of the crime scene to see if the suspect volunteers information that only the real killer would know.
If the police of 1992 had understood suggestibility, they would have seen that Colin Stagg wasn't revealing hidden knowledge. He was just clumsily repeating back the dark themes Lizzie James was spoon-feeding him. Module 6 of the syllabus, Covert Techniques, also specifically addresses this delicate balance between gathering intelligence and illegal entrapment.
Now, You might be listening to this, maybe driving to work or doing the dishes, thinking, okay, that's fascinating for homicide detectives, but why should I care about a university policing syllabus? The reason this matters to you is that learning to recognize these cognitive traps is a universal necessity.
It really is.
Whether you work in corporate strategy, healthcare, tech development, or even just navigating arguments in your personal relationships, understanding how confirmation bias warps reality is a superpower.
It absolutely is. The human brain is naturally lazy. It wants to find the quickest route to an answer. Fixating on the thing that neatly fits your preconceived notions, while completely ignoring the glaring red flags of reality, is a fundamental human flaw. The Lizzie James operation is just that flaw magnified to a catastrophic degree.
So what does this all mean for the people who actually lived through this nightmare? Where are the two men at the center of this investigation today?
Well, Colin Stagg, the innocent man who was hunted by his own government, spent 13 terrifying months in custody before his trial collapsed. He lived under a cloud of public suspicion for over a decade.
It's agonizing.
It is. Finally, after Napper was identified by DNA as the true killer, Stagg received a formal public apology from the police. He was ultimately awarded £706,000 in compensation for the staggering miscarriage of justice he endured.
And Robert Napper, the man who was hiding in plain sight.
Napper is currently serving out his life sentences at Broadmoor Hospital. Broadmoor is a high-security psychiatric facility in the UK, reserved for the most dangerous and severely mentally ill offenders.
What's his life like there?
According to reports from the staff there, his existence is bleak and tightly controlled. He frequently receives death threats from other patients. There was actually an incident where another patient threw a tray of breakfast food over him, and Napper reportedly ran back to his room in tears, entirely devoid of the terrifying power he wielded over his victims.
Wow. But the mundane reality of his day-to-day life is jarring, isn't it?
Very much so. Inside this fortress, he is described as a model, compliant patient. He spends his days playing checkers, playing Scrabble, and participating in hospital volleyball games. He just exists in a quiet routine, entirely removed from the generational devastation he caused on the outside.
It is a profoundly sobering contrast.
It really is.
Well, we have covered a lot of ground today. We traced the heartbreaking murder of Rachel Nickell, diving into the psychological manipulation of a lonely man desperate for connection. We explored the deadly consequences of confirmation bias that allowed a violent predator to slip through the cracks. And ultimately, we saw how the justice system was forced to internalize these failures, turning dark history into the academic safeguards that train today's investigators.
This raises an important question, especially as we navigate the modern world. Back in 1992, it was a manual, human-generated psychological profile that led an entire police force to ignore a real killer and frame an innocent man. The investigators had absolute, unwavering faith in their theoretical model.
Right. They trusted the model over the reality.
Exactly. So here is something to think about. Today, law enforcement agencies, financial institutions, tech companies, and even hiring managers are increasingly relying on predictive algorithms and AI behavioral models to judge our behavior, assess our risk, and decide our futures.
Yeah, the algorithms are everywhere.
They are. If human profiling can create a feedback loop that results in such a profound, deadly tunnel vision, how much blind faith should we really be putting into the algorithmic profiles that increasingly define our world today? Are we learning from the mistakes of 1992, or are we just building faster, more efficient machines to make them all over again?